Okay, in this video, I'm going to kind of take you through Daniel chapter 3. So I'll go ahead and read the passages of Scripture so that you can hear what's in the text, and then I'll go ahead and just explain a few parts of that text. King Nebuchadnezzar made a golden statue whose height was 60 cubits and whose width was 6 cubits. He set it up on the plain of Dura in the province of Babylon. The king Nebuchadnezzar sent for the satraps, the prefects, and the governors, the counselors, the treasurers, the justices, the magistrates, and all the officials of the provinces to assemble and come to the dedication of the statue that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. So the satraps, the prefects, the governors, the counselors, the treasurers, the justices, the magistrates, and all the officials of the provinces assembled for the dedication of the statue that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. When they were standing before the statue that Nebuchadnezzar had set up, the herald proclaimed aloud, "You are commanded, O peoples, nations, and languages, that when you hear the sound of the horn, pipe, lyre, trigon, harp, drum, an entire musical ensemble, you are to fall down and worship the golden statue that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. Whoever does not fall down and worship shall immediately be thrown into the furnace of blazing fire." Therefore, as soon as all the peoples heard the sound of the horn, pipe, lyre, trigon, harp, drum, an entire musical ensemble, all the peoples, nations, and languages fell down and worshipped the golden statue that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. Accordingly, at this time, certain Chaldeans came forward and denounced the Jews. They said to King Nebuchadnezzar, "O king, live forever. You, O king, have made a decree that everyone who hears the sound of the horn, pipe, lyre, trigon, harp, drum, and entire musical ensemble shall fall down and worship the golden statue. And whoever does not fall down and worship shall be thrown into the furnace of blazing fire. There are certain Jews whom you have appointed over the affairs of the province of Babylon, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. These pay no heed to you, O king. They do not serve your gods, and they do not worship the golden statue that you have set up." Then Nebuchadnezzar, in furious rage, commanded that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego be brought in, so they brought those men before the king. Nebuchadnezzar said to them, "Is it true, O Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that you do not serve my gods, and you do not worship the golden statue that I have set up? Now if you are ready, when you hear the sound of the horn, pipe, lyre, trigon, harp, drum, and entire musical ensemble, to fall down and worship the statue that I have made, well and good. But if you do not worship, you shall immediately be thrown into a furnace of blazing fire. And who is the God that will deliver you out of my hands?" Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego answered the king, "O Nebuchadnezzar, we have no need to present a defense to you in this matter. If our God, whom we serve, is able to deliver us from the furnace of blazing fire and out of your hand, O king, let him deliver us. But if not, be it known to you, O king, that we will not serve your gods, and we will not worship the golden statue that you have set up." So a couple of things here we're going to note about these verses. First of all, this language of the king sets up. You may have noticed when I was reading the passage how often the author emphasizes this particular action of the king, that he sets up the golden statue. So we don't really know exactly what this statue is. Some have speculated that the king erects something of a 90-foot tall, 9-foot wide obelisk. So it gives us something of this when it says that it's 60 cubits and whose width was 6 cubits. So 90 foot tall, 9 feet wide, pretty large obelisk. That's what this statue is. So some may think it's the statue may actually be something that looks like Nebuchadnezzar. but obelisks were common features, and so that may be what we're talking about. The repetition that it is gold and that the king set it up seems really significant to this author. So because it keeps being emphasized when we've already given the information, we're reminded of that information. The kings set it up. Daniel's friends really are accused of disobeying the king in verses 8 through 12. You kind of wonder if this story is somehow or another maybe imitating the one of with Esther and Mordecai and Haman, because it has some similar thought, but it doesn't necessarily have to. It just has parallels in that people make these kind of accusations, and then whether or not Jews are going to be suffering because they are somehow or another seen as a threat within the community. So once again, we're trying to remind ourselves, this is during the time of Nebuchadnezzar, so this is during the time when people from Judah are living in exile in Babylon. They are a minority. There may be kind of anti-Semitic views of the people in Babylon because these people don't serve their gods, and will have customs and practices that are very different from them. And so there may be this kind of hostility, particularly though we may see kind of internal court tensions because really they're focused on these people who are in charge of provinces. There may be jealousy that is here. Let's get these people, these foreigners who have been placed into these positions of authority, and let's get them out and let's place some of our own people in these positions. So it doesn't have to be that Daniel, the author of Daniel, is writing knowing the story of Esther. It certainly could be, but it may be that these are just themes that are quite popular at the time. So we have to be careful not to engage in parallelomania, where just because you see parallels, you try to make a conclusion, or you jump to the conclusions that the parallels suggest that one author has taken from another. The king then, in verses 13 through 18, gives Daniel's friends a chance, but they're resolute not to worship this golden statue, whatever the form of the statue is. Verse 17 through 18 is kind of interesting. It's a powerful verse. These words here of these three men about whether or not God is going to save them. I don't think that they doubt God's ability so much to save them, but it may be doubting whether or not it's a part of God's purpose that he will do so. But in some way, the story is a story really kind of meant to be about courage. So now Siao, who is the author of our textbook, doesn't really think so. And on page 56 in his little commentary on Daniel that is produced by the Westminster Bible Champion, on page 56, he questions this. So the situation is not that they refuse to give a defense for the decision to the king, which, if correct, would indicate their courage. Rather, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego do not feel compelled to respond to the king's taunt at all. Courage is not really the issue, for a comeback is simply not theirs to give. So he's not too convinced that what we're really seeing here is courage. However, I see that if you're going to be resolute and you're not going to serve the king's gods or worship his statue, or bow down to his commands, and what the threat is, it does seem to me like this is a story of courage. Now, let's move then to verses 19 through 25. Then Nebuchadnezzar was so filled with rage against Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego that his face was distorted. He ordered the furnace heated up 7 times more than was customary, and ordered some of the strongest guards in his army to bind Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and to throw them into the furnace of blazing fire. So the men were bound, still wearing their tunics, their trousers, their hats, and their outer garments, and they were thrown into the furnace of blazing fire. Because the king's command was urgent and the furnace was so overheated, the raging flames killed the men who lifted Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. But the three men, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, fell down, bound, into the furnace of the blazing fire. Then King Nebuchadnezzar was astonished and rose up quickly. He said to his counselors, "Was it not three men that we threw bound into the fire?" They answered the king, "True, O king." He replied, "But I see four men unbound, walking in the middle of the fire, and they are not hurt, and the fourth has the appearance of a god." Or the Aramaic may have, and some people may, translation may render this, a son of the gods. So a couple of things here. The king has Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego thrown into this fire that the author states it was heated 7 times is probably somehow or another meant to be symbolic. We're not really quite sure how you really heat something 7 times, but of course the number 7 is a powerful number within biblical literature indicating kind of completeness. So we're the author's trying to indicate something of this is just as hot as it could possibly be. Now, is the author stalling the event by going into details about their clothes in verse 21? Saying what they were wearing. They were bound wearing their tunics, their trousers, their hat. Why does the author have to go into that? There may be something of a stall in the story, to build kind of the anticipation, waiting for the next event that'll happen. So it is kind of curious that so much detail is given to what they wore. The furnace is probably something like a kiln, since the three men really fell down into it. So not so much like an oven that you're thrown, kind of laterally into it, but they're kind of thrown down into this furnace. So the king is astonished at what he sees. And so the phrase that is, gets a lot of people's attention is verse 25, where it says a son of God. So what is really meant by a son of God? Of course, there has been allegorization throughout the church history where this son of God is, since Jesus is called, son of God, that some people, think that this is Jesus with, standing in the midst of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and providing them kind of protection. But the author of Daniel is not, thinking along that. The language of the Son of God can be something of kind of an angelic being. So angels are sons of God, and so that there is one of these sons of God who is present, kind of providing an indication, a symbol of God's presence in the fire. So the author is claiming that God does not necessarily help his people avoid the fire. He didn't. Nothing was done here so that these men escaped going into the fire. But it does indicate that he is present with them in the fire. So again, remember about the time that the book of Daniel was written, which is somewhere around 170 BC, 170 BCE. And so this is during the time when, many Jewish people are kind of in the fire, as it were, of what Antiochus Epiphanes is doing. And so the book of Daniel is calling for imperial resistance to Antiochus, showing kind of wisdom amongst those who will resist what the what the emperor is ordering. So if Nebuchadnezzar, commands can be something akin to parallel to what Antiochus Epiphanes is commanding, where he's trying to outlaw basically being Jewish and requiring Jews to sacrifice to gods and stop circumcision and stop Sabbath observance. And Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego are seen as these people who are willing to say no to the emperor, even if it means loss of life. So probably for the author of Daniel, this is they're the model, as it were, of what Jews living in his day ought to do in response to what Antiochus was requiring. And so the story is that a son of God, an angelic, as it were, or celestial being, is present with these courageous individuals, but they're not saved from being in the fire. So too, maybe Daniel's author is trying to communicate is we may have to go through the fire. There may even be some deaths, but nevertheless, God is with his people. And so we'll finish up then Daniel 3, verses 26 through 30. Nebuchadnezzar then approached the door of the furnace of blazing fire and said, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, servants of the Most High God, come out, come here. So Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego came out from the fire, and the satraps, the prefects, the governors, and the king's counselors gathered together and saw that the fire had not had any power over the bodies of those men. The hair of their heads was not sinned. Their tunics, which were mentioned earlier, were not harmed. Not even the smell of fire came from them. Nebuchadnezzar said, Blessed be the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who has sent his angel and delivered his servants who trusted in him. They disobeyed the king's command and yielded up their bodies rather than serve and worship any god except their own God. Therefore, I make a decree. Any people, nation, or language that utters blasphemy against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego shall be torn limb from limb, and their houses laid in ruins. For there is no other God who is able to deliver in this way. Then the king promoted Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the province of Babylon. Really some interesting things to see there coming from being attributed to Nebuchadnezzar. So the king recognizes the God who is above, really, in a sense, all other gods when he calls him Most High God, a very Jewish way of talking about Yahweh. And so calling him the Most High God would indicate somehow or another being supreme over all other gods. So this is not a claim that from Nebuchadnezzar that there is only God. There is only the God of the Jews, and no other gods exist. But that kind of in the pantheon of gods, the God that the Jews serve is a high God. No, so we don't know if he's kind of come into this because the king has been given a vision of this, so that he now sees these things, or how he arrives at this particular interpretation. So that's this Most High God. Now is what he sees is a visionary experience, or is that something that was there? And so Most High God is, again, this language that's very Jewish and on the lips now of Nebuchadnezzar. The king now knows the answer to his earlier question that is asked in verse 15. So if they don't do this, if they don't fall down immediately, who is the God that will deliver you out of my hands? Well, now we have the answer. So the God of Israel is going to deliver these individuals from the power of the king. So the king ends up blessing the men's gods for delivering them, and prohibits blaspheming his name. Now, it doesn't, again, mean his subjects aren't worshiping other gods, but he's providing some kind of protection now for the worship of Israel's God, so that the Jews can continue to worship their gods, and their God should not be slandered. So is this the hope of some Jews in the author's day, that, what they would love for Antiochus to do is to come to this realization that God is going to deliver them out of his hands, and that he too would come to the realization that Israel's God is a great, great God, Most High God, and that he would relent from the commands that he has issued, and ultimately allow Jews to worship, which, eventually he is going to allow them to have their temple back. He gets defeated, and he has other issues within his empire, and so he's not going to use all of his forces against Jews to retake, the temple. So as long as Jews are willing to continue paying him tribute, he's willing to allow them to worship their gods and practice their ancestral customs. So he doesn't want to spend his time having to deal with the Jewish issue, the Jews in Jerusalem, and their resistance to his imperial commands. So maybe that's the hope of some Jews in Daniel's day, that he will become something like a Nebuchadnezzar, that God will be blessed by their enemies when they see how he has delivered them. So that may be the hope. So then the three men are honored by being promoted. In this, he promotes them in the provinces of Babylon. And so we get this. Not only are they delivered, but we also see kind of an advancement. So they're still working for this Gentile. They're still working for this non-Jew, and that's not a problem. But as long as the non-Jews permit Jews to worship their God unharassed. So that is a quick little sketch of Daniel chapter 3.